Before we get into today's episode, I want to give a big shout out to this week's sponsor, Barrett Boards. Born out of a passion for working with wood, Barrett Boards started as a hobby in Cornwall and has grown into something pretty special. They work with local timber mills using sustainable wood to craft chopping boards, serving boards, and beautiful bespoke tables that are not just functional but genuinely beautiful. Every board is unique and every piece tells a story. You can feel the craftsmanship in every cut. For chefs like me, kit like this makes all the difference. So, joining me in the studio today is Andrew Turvil, who is described as the Independent as one of the UK's arbiters of taste. He's held editorial roles in food and hospitality publication and guides, notably the Good Food Guide, the AA Restaurant Guide, the Witch Guide for pubs. So, as a critic, writer, and editor of much of his career, he's had a huge focus on pubs, restaurants, and such forth. In 2015, he bought and ran a pub for nearly 10 years, and now we're here to discuss his newest and notable book that I've ever seen, which is Blood, Sweat and Asparagus Spears, the story of the 1990s restaurant revolution, which was published on the 25th of September this year. Welcome to the show, Andrew.
Nice to be here, Lee. Good to speak to you.
Absolutely. And obviously, we spoke previously to having this discussion. And yes, I'm intrigued to kind of get to almost the nuts and bolts about what's in the book and things like that, and any other stories that you can share with myself and the listeners and that kind of thing. So the book, I mean, firsthand, it talks about stories like Marco Pierre White on the early reflections of what we know as now as TV celebrity chefs such as Jamie Oliver. But it also looks at the restaurant trends through the 1990s and how they paved way for what we know now as the staple on today's menus, really. Black cod miso, triple chips, and all of these wonderful things that we see. It also discusses how some of the legislatively structural changes with pub licensing, gastropub, the evolution of that, and basically how it shaped the wider food and restaurant. So yeah, do you want to talk to us about the key themes about Blood, Sweat and Asparagus Spears?
Sure, yeah. It's interesting. When I first started looking into the idea that, yeah, because I joined the Good Food Guide just at the beginning of the 1990s. I was very young and didn't know that much about hospitality industry at the time, and I didn't really appreciate, I don't think, what a significant decade it was. It's when I started to research the book, looking for themes about what I could write about. To be honest, I wanted to write something about hospitality and my experience. And it was just phenomenal how much happened in a relatively short period of time. When I start the book talking with Tom Jane, who was the editor of the Good Food Guide when I took over, not took over, when I first joined, he talked about us not really having a tradition of eating out in this country. You know, it was a special occasion thing, and yeah, that was one of the big changes, I think, because the 90s coincided with there were cultural changes as well as, you know, practical physical changes, and restaurants became much more relaxed, much more open to everybody. There was, yeah, dining. French dining had dominated for 100 years, really. Any association with good food was French. Menus were written in French, which is quite a barrier, quite a class barrier. And that was one of the major themes, really, was that there weren't many British chefs working at sort of at the top end. Most of the top restaurants were run by French people. The chefs were, the young chefs in the kitchen were French. But that started to change in the 70s and 80s, and it was that generation trained by the likes of the Roux brothers, Raymond Blanc, Pierre Kaufmann, and Nico Ladnis. They were the sort of the young guns that sort of really started to take hold in the 1990s and bring in their own experiences. So they learned French, as I'm sure you did, you know, classical French cuisine, and it's still the bedrock of what we eat now. But it was that really started to develop and change with those chefs bringing in their own ideas. At the same time, there was a greater informality in society started to develop through the 1990s. So you had things like the pubs, as we talked about, the Eagle. Um, and then there was the rise of Asian cuisine really started to come of age in the 1990s as well. Prior to that, there was the curry house and your Chinese takeaway, but really it was the 1990s when people like Alan Yao and Wagamama and Moshi Moshi Sushi, where that we started to really sort of get to taste some more interesting and more authentic kind of Asian food. So there's a lot happening. There's a lot happening at the same time, and it was fascinating bringing it all together in a book because I don't think anybody had really done that before, and I do think that the 90s was the most dramatic period of change.
Absolutely, and with you saying that, and it's things like you say about the early adoption of like normalizing cuisines now, what we see all over the place, sushi, the
Yeah.
fusion, modern plating techniques. Obviously, the birth of that came from the 90s. I mean, we were always touted from the French as having the bland food reputation, that really kind of
Mm.
awful cuisine. And I think it's pioneers like Marco Raymond who took it on, and they weren't out to compete with the French. I mean, Marco never set foot in France until later on in his career,
That's
but
right.
you could really see that they were applying everything that they'd picked up from the Roux, Kaufman, and that kind of thing. And it really does, and that comes through in the book as well, that kind of story and how that generationally passes through as well. I think it's a really great kind, like you say, the era itself, it was a dawn of an era. There was a lot going on politically. There was a
Mm.
lot going on. I mean, the miners' strikes and all of these kind of things that started changing the way that people eat and ate. You know, the Bernie Tavern was in its heyday, but people were now starting to look beyond that kind of thing.
They were. I think it's interesting because it was the top level, the mid level, and the bottom level were all changing in that time, really. So through the 90s, fast food was really taking off, and mid level dining as well, with the introduction of changes like Cafe Rouge, and so there was a lot of activity. It was the 1980s was a funny decade because it was still quite rife with snobbery. It was all the sort of the Hooray Henrys and all that kind of city boy type stuff.
I was
Um,
just about to say the yuppie
the yuppie,
generation.
the
Yeah,
yuppie. That's the word I was searching for. Absolutely, it was the yuppie generation, and I think it was the 1990s when it became much more egalitarian. I mean, it became sort of literally the dress code kind of fell away. Casual dining kind of was booming, but also these people we wanted good quality food. We
yeah,
wanted proper,
absolutely.
real food, and that was what was happening. There was a real. I spoke to quite a few chefs in writing the book, people like Paul Heathcote, and they talked about how back in the sort of in the late 80s it was quite hard to get hold of really really good quality ingredients. Sometimes they had to encourage farmers to grow stuff if they didn't have the land to grow their own stuff. Back in the 70s and the 80s, yes, an awful lot of stuff was imported from Paris. Until I know the Roux brothers would regularly be shipping stuff in from Parisian markets. And we've got great food here. We've got amazing produce, and I think that's the 90s was the decade when I think we seem to really realise that, and things started to change.
And that's it. I mean, I started my career so Stoke-on-Trent College back in 1997. So I
Mm-hmm.
was at the end of this kind of, well, I wasn't call it the end of the era, but for me, we would see, Marco was on a pedestal. He was,
Yeah,
who
yeah.
we aspired to.
Mm.
That's the kind of food I want to cook towards and that kind of thing. And with them kind of constructing this new generation of food and just reconstructing what we wanted, it was quite hard to kind of not see the likes of Gordon Ramsay starting to come through as a real definitive kind of character. I mean, I've listened to various podcasts discussing, I think it was only the other day somebody described him as a beast of prep. He would never not be ready. He was
Mm.
almost he was an anomaly that in the kitchen that he could prep up and these kind of things. So, I mean, you trace at least 33 different iconic dishes throughout the book. Which dishes did you feel was most surprising and illuminating in terms of their legacy?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, I decided to make the chapters all a dish to kind of put the food centre stage, really. I mean, some of them are, yeah, they're iconic, but some of them are a bit, so I've got prawn cocktail, and I've got, I think I've got prawn cocktail, and I've got um, things from my past, like chicken korma, which relates to my childhood, because I talk a bit about that. But yeah, I mean, there's so many dishes in there. I think Marco's tagliatelle of oysters with caviar is the first dish that he described in what he, I think, as being kind of perfection. Funny enough, I've almost eaten it. I had when I went to the Hyde Park Hotel. The editor I was dining with, he had it as a starter, so I got to taste it, but I didn't have it to myself. But I think it's really interesting at that time. That was when Marco was, really creating dishes that his what he thought was perfection. If Marco thinks it's perfection, then it must be pretty good. It's But a lot of the stuff was. I include dishes from Morrow, for example. The Merchant House, the fat duck, triple cooked chips, and the reason I picked triple cooked chips was because actually most of like decades a bit fluid, aren't they? I always say the '60s ended in 1968. Really, there's you could easily call the decade of the '90s 87 to kind of 2001. Really,
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
that's probably the period of most change, because Heston's biggest experimentation stuff when he was really getting going with that really was into the sort of the beginning of the 2000s, 2001, 2002. Then he was really experimenting then and really motoring. But there was just so many. I mean, things you remember are often the small things. It's when you when you're writing about restaurants and eating in restaurants a lot. It's often the simple things you remember. You remember. For me, St. John was just blew my mind when St. John came out. I felt it just felt like the kind of food I wanted to be eating, the kind of stuff you could eat every day. But it was just all about the produce, all about the ingredients, and just fantastic simplicity. I mean, really the the tasting menu was just was always around in the '90s, but it really didn't get flying until kind of the noughties. I don't know if you'd agree with that, but
and that's the interesting thing, obviously, because we've gone through so many different kind of. I almost call it the '90s. I call it the Marco era. The noughties,
yeah,
I call it the Ferran Adria Heston era. And
yeah,
then now, I mean, I don't even know where we are now, but when we look at places like Ikoyi and things like that,
yeah,
these amazing restaurants that are just so there's nothing else like them now. And it kind of takes you back to when, there was nothing else like Harvey's at the time. There was nothing
mm,
else like early Le Gavroche. It was very, very set in its time. And so obviously
mm,
these dishes, as much as you say they are iconic, I like to cook with nostalgia in my mind. Not to the extent of what
mm.
Heston can do, but I've made a dessert a few years ago that I mean, it was almost a memory of Christmas. It was a caramel tart that tasted like those little Quality Street, the little caramel cups.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
that was the idea behind the dish for a little dessert at Christmas. It was just a bit of fun and it was a bit of kind of thing. And like you say, but getting these dishes that
mm,
are based around, you know, nostalgia and feelings, what evokes those kind of feelings, it's really kind of magical. But ultimately, some dishes and cuisines they don't actually take up, and they don't really take off despite the early hype. I mean, what
mm,
gastronomic
yes.
experiments do you think you saw that kind of didn't work?
Yeah, that's true. It's absolutely true. Well, I think it's interesting, isn't it, that if you one thing we have, what you just described there, is the excitement and the variety of what we have now, and the diversity of what we have now, and that kind of developed through the '90s. But we were receptive to it because if you go to Italy and France, for example, you can eat absolutely incredibly well, and it's absolutely beautiful. The produce is amazing, but there's not a lot of variety. I was talking to someone the other day who was a very senior person back in the UK in the sort of '80s and '90s, and he said it's great where I live, but it's boring because it's the same. Everything's the same because the classic recipes you can't mess with them.
Yeah,
You're not
absolutely.
allowed to mess with them. We
No.
were we were allowed, people like Heston and Paul Kitching, who were we were allowed to mess with them because we didn't perhaps hold them in. our food culture wasn't as deep and it wasn't as rich. It wasn't as well protected. So we were able to experiment. We were able to develop. We were able to draw ideas and flavors from around the world, much more so than our European neighbours, I think. Which is why we've kind of accelerated through from the 90s to now to be pretty exciting. Obviously, there's experimental stuff all over the world, as you say, Fair and Andrew and stuff. So but broadly speaking, our food culture now is so rich because of that experimentation and that willingness to change.
Yeah, and I think that's absolutely true because we've seen so many kind of changes in our food. I mean, obviously we've moved on from curries on a Friday night after a few lagers and stuff like
Mm,
that, straight through to the rise and fall of the tasting menu. A
mm,
lot of people are arguing now and saying, "Oh, long-winded tasting menus now still,
yeah.
relevant and that kind of thing." So everything changes and that kind of thing. But obviously, just kind of dipping back into the 90s, we saw so
Mm,
many different cuisines starting to kind of challenge people to eat a little bit more daring.
mm,
We
yeah.
also saw the rise of the ego of the chef, the kitchen wars and the hierarchies. And
Yes,
did
indeed.
which part of
Mm.
like did you see when you were researching like about this conflict and things like that?
Yeah, it is really interesting, isn't it? I think that it was a great quote from Michael Winner, which I think I put in the book about how chefs should stay in the kitchen. It's really classic Michael Winner, very kind of but yeah, it was incredible how more visible chefs became and fantastic because it demystified food, and gave great opportunity for people to have fascinating careers. Ego wise, yeah, I mean it's interesting. People do seem to be, you're either in Marco's camp or you're not. It seems to me when I talk to professional chefs,
It
that
does seem that way, yes.
yeah, you're either pro or anti. I spoke to him a few times in the book, and I've never actually met him face to face. I've seen him work. I've seen him been in restaurants when he's been around, but I only spoke to him on the phone for the book. But it's not surprising, is it really, when anything's involved with you know money, TV, glamour, it goes to all of our heads. I'm just amazed by how well Jamie Oliver handled it. Really, for someone so incredibly young, that kind of sort of jumped the queue in a way, didn't he? Went
Yeah.
from the River Cafe as just a young lad, early 20s, and suddenly to be given this show and all this, it's crazy amount of attention. And money that came his way, and he's managed to stay so incredibly grounded.
I love
Uh,
that because I recently listened to the interview with Davina McCall, and he really went
mm,
into those early days.
mm,
And I've always admired Jamie Oliver for the fact that he was just a gobby lad who was there at
mm,
the time and got in front of the cameras, and he talks about his troubles by the money that he got, the money that he spent, and all these kind of things. So it really is, and it's an amazing story to kind of see that. Obviously, we've seen all of the magic that goes around Marco and all that kind of thing. I mean, the kitchen wars and all the things that Marco wrote about in his autobiography, it's almost surreal. Did any of the chefs
mm.
actually kind of, when you kind of penned their version of the
Mm.
story, did you get any pushback on the events or anything?
I haven't yet, actually. No, and I didn't want to make the book. I wanted the book to be positive,
Yes.
because I'm passionate and enthusiastic about it all and believe it was all a force for good. But obviously, I do deal with some of the macho culture, which got a lot of attention, a lot of criticism, and how that's changed. But I haven't had no. Everyone's been really nice. I was I think maybe I was expecting perhaps a little bit more kickback, but I think it's because the tone is generally positive and supportive.
Yeah, I really
Uh,
like that because I've read the book myself and
mm,
I thoroughly enjoyed everything about it. It was really it was insightful and it kind of filled in the blanks of the opposite side of the story for me, where
mm,
we've got this, we've got all of these. Oh, that back in those days, you get, in it's so much trouble and all those other things. And
mm,
you put a really nice positive spin on that era to bring it forward, so it's not this just oh, you went into work and you got beasted.
yeah.
and that was a really nice thing, because it was a good time, because everyone looks back at it with fond memories. It was the time, I always say one of my favorite years was 1996. I was
Hmm.
just turned 16 years old. Euro 96,
Yeah, yeah,
glamour, the supermodel, all of these things kind of started to kind of show its face, and it really made a wonderful kind of feel good era. So I look back on the 90s as a really,
mm,
really positive era, and there's so many chefs that I know have worked with and things like that turn around and go,
mm,
oh, but I always remember this, I always remember that, and it is a very much like a positive kind of onset that was created back then. But you put that really kind of, it's just a nice way that you've portrayed that in the book. It's not all, like I say, shouting, swearing, and screaming.
no, no. It's fascinating when you look back, isn't it? I think there's something about the '90s because it was it feels sort of freer and more and simpler, perhaps because it was kind of it was the beginning of the digital age, but it's kind of pre really the digital age.
Yeah,
So we
yeah.
didn't all have didn't have mobile phones. Even in '96, I don't think I got a mobile phone until about 97, 98, 1999, maybe, I can't remember. But it seemed like a simple time. And when we look back and reflect, also we were younger as well. That helps.
Yeah.
That helps when you're looking back. And yes, I mean, there's no doubt about it that that the atmosphere in the kitchens. Obviously, I wasn't in a professional kitchen at the time, but yeah, the atmosphere was aggressive and macho, and and challenging. But but actually, a lot of workspaces probably were. It was a different time. It was a different time.
Absolutely.
Mm,
You also talk about in the book about economic and regulatory and structural changes in that kind
mm.
of era as well. What kind of policies do you think made an impact on people dining out?
Yeah, there was. I think I say in the book that the '90s began with a crash, not a bang. There was it was I was in negative equity in the early '90s. It was financially quite tough, and a very tough environment for hospitality. Not as tough as now. Which I think
That's my next question.
yeah, we'll come to that probably later, but this is the toughest it's ever been. But it was pretty tough in the '90s, in the early '90s, and a lot of places were closing. And we used to, part of my job then was, I used to, talk to restaurateurs quite a lot. So we'd get a lot of calls from people who were, closing down and struggling economically. But it was so it was. I think you're right about the '96, '97. There's kind of this. It's good to split the '90s into two sections really, because there was the second half of it from sort of '96, the Labour government coming in up until probably 2001 and 9/11. That was a really optimistic sort of 5-6 years. But the early part of it was economically tough. And I think you were talking about from legislation point of view, there was the beer orders were changing pubs dramatically. So there were lots of the big beer companies, big brewers had to sell off a lot of their pubs because they weren't it was considered a monopoly, and they all had to sell off quite a few thousand pubs. And that's when the Eagle guys picked up a cheap lease. But that's led to pretty continuous problems in the pub industry as well, really, because I had a pub lease for 9 years, and they're not great. It's a challenging way of running a business.
Absolutely.
Uh,
It really is that kind of extended part of the era where we've seen. I think where you say it was split into two parts, where you've got this, like you say, the early '90s, late '90s. It really did feel like that, because for me growing up,
mm,
it was predominantly, that was my teen years, and
mm.
to see such a fundamental shift. A quick break from all the chat just to talk a little bit more about Barrett boards. They offer a whole range from simple, elegant, face grain woods that show off all the natural grain of the wood, through to the tough end grain boards built to take years of knife work. These aren't mass produced, they're made with real attention to detail, honed and finished so that they are both hard wearing, easy on the eye. They've even worked with chefs across the country, making everything from heavy-duty butcher's blocks to slim charcuterie boards and beautiful bespoke tables. I love that level of craft and flexibility. it was incredible to see 1994 to 97 were like it literally was two different eras. So
Mm.
it really did kind of change everything up quite a lot. So in the context, it means like today's pressures, like rents, wages, regulation, inflation, all of these kind of things. Which
Mm.
lessons from the 90s still hold, or which do you think of obsolete or cautionary?
Gosh, yeah, that's a big question. I think it seems to me that we haven't learned, or governments haven't learned how to support hospitality.
No, they really haven't. I mean,
So I think it was there was perhaps more, more freedom there back then. Uh,
yeah,
it's a lot harder. There was a lot of, it's an exciting period for um, empire building as well in the 19th. I
yeah,
think
yeah,
it felt that there was more opportunity at Conran and Marco himself and Corbin and King and all these people buying up old restaurants, bringing old restaurants back to life. I thought that was fascinating.
yeah.
That surprised me that people did that. But I think the biggest legacy isn't really a financial one. It's it's the fact that the growers and the producers that came through and started forming in the 90s to meet the demand mean that we've now got an incredibly rich supply line
Absolutely.
of amazing ingredients. That's the biggest change, I think.
I found on the last podcast with Mark Hayward from Dingley Dell, he talks about that
Yeah.
same era that kind of started. We had the EU bills that were coming through and changing
Mm.
things that really meant that farmers had to choose a path. It was either go big or go small, and it really did kind of change that up quite a lot for the generation.
It did, and obviously they had a really tough, really, really difficult 90s as well, with all of the food scares and the BSE and
Oh,
everything.
absolutely.
There was a farming is another area, a bit like hospitality,
Correct.
that has not been supported by successive governments.
So obviously we saw all this culture change. I'm kind of changing the shift a little bit now and going into like the media side of things of the
Mm.
90s because obviously that changed quite a lot as well. So the how critical was things like the chef TV shows, food programming in the
Mm.
acceleration of our restaurant culture in the 90s?
I think it was massive. Actually, I think it was really big. I mean, because Marco, you wouldn't really consider Marco, certainly not Marco of the 90s, as a celebrity chef, would you? Really?
Absolutely not.
He was an anti-celebrity chef. And I love the fact that he had Alan Crompton Bout, this PR guy, sort of considered sort of the father of restaurant PR behind it, but he didn't do any TV really. He didn't do any advertising. He was just obsessed with getting 3 Michelin stars, wasn't he?
Hmm.
And holding them. So that was his 90s. So that the flip side of that, totally other side of the coin, is the sort of cooking entering the mainstream, and I think that's what changed in the 90s. And looking at Jamie Oliver coming in, I think 99 was when Jamie Oliver kind of hit the screens,
Yeah.
and Jamie Oliver wouldn't have existed in 1990. Somebody, a young working class lad like him would go, yeah, that kind of energy it was completely different energy. So I think that's, it just changed so much through the
Yeah,
90s.
no, I completely agree because we saw, like I said, I was a huge fan of Jamie, and for me, I was 1999, I was just turning 18, 19 years old, I was a young chef. Then you
Mm.
see this young guy, similar kind of age, who's, enjoying what he's doing. He's riding around on a scooter, he's got his mates over, they're having a beer, everything, and it just gave a coolness to food and like
Mm.
that energy. And I think that kind of it took away the stuffiness.
Yeah,
When he was
yeah.
mixing up a salad, he wasn't measuring it like we were shown in college, and it almost created for me as a young up and coming chef to be a bit more rebellious and try new things and not be as measured and
Yeah.
calculated and things.
Exactly. Yeah. I think yes, it was very formal, wasn't it? Cookery programs in the old days, and certainly when I was growing up, sort of the '80s stuff was pretty formal. Apart from Keith Floyd, maybe he was
Yeah, yeah,
had a bit had a bit more energy to him. But yeah, it did. I mean, entering the mainstream made it was great. I mean, look at all the sort of food supplements in newspapers, cookbook sales absolutely boomed. Most of them linked to TV series. So food became much more a mainstream part of culture. Uh,
absolutely.
and that absolutely started in the 90s with things like Ready Steady Cook. and it gave great opportunities to some individuals. But it also seeped through into people becoming more interested in food, talking about food. And I think that's why it's part of us developing sort of the habit of eating out more regularly, because we certainly did. The numbers suggest how regularly people eat out changed absolutely massively, from the end of the 80s into the noughties.
Well, you see, you mentioned earlier, obviously the casual side of food that changed quite a lot, and
Mm.
you used the wording of fast casual fooding. You
Yeah,
mentioned in the book that coffee outlets rose 847% in that decade,
yeah,
and
yeah.
basically, this kind of, do you see how it the casual side of dining interrelated with high-end restaurants, like shaping public expectations?
Yeah, it's interesting how they exist. They exist kind of like in the same space, but completely different space, don't they? It's they both they both developed quite dramatically, but I think with in sort of the mid-range dining, it's so many powerful chains, aren't there? That someone comes up with a really good idea, and then that idea gets bought on by a bigger company who then move it on. So we've got an awful lot of chains with the standards. Often they start quite good, and then it just kind of sinks down. And we've seen even a powerful name like Jamie Oliver can struggle in the
Apps, yeah, yeah. We
in that market.
had his
Which
problems, yeah.
Yeah, which is absolutely no guarantee. But I think that it's been a really good thing, because it helps us. It gets people eating out more often. But there's a lot, certain you go to certain towns, and there's just all they've got is four pizza restaurants, and that's all they've got.
Yeah, and
And a pub.
I think I do think that I mean, they call it the high street dining.
Yeah, yeah,
That's a whole different level of different now, and
mm,
it's not close to what I remember. There's
no,
so many you can choose every type of cuisine. Not saying that they're good cuisines, but you've got them on tap. But I
mm,
think like when it comes to like high end institutional restaurants, I mean, yeah, Le Gavroche, Michel Roux decided that it was time to move on and do something different. And we've seen other kind of restaurants, but you see like Raymond Blanc is now going through a re-energizing view
mm,
of Le Manoir. He's not going to suddenly just shut the doors and off he goes. They are going through a process of re-energizing that as that's an
yeah,
institution. Lisa Allen's done the same up in the north, where
yeah.
she left very briefly and then went straight back in
Did,
and
didn't she? Yeah.
giving that kind of new energy to old kind of you know older style establishment really established restaurants. I mean, restaurant Gordon Ramsay's been the same for the best part of 25 years, and we've seen the alumni that have passed through that kitchen who have gone on to massive, Claire Smith,
Yeah,
and the
yeah.
list is endless. And I see that as a wonderful thing that we can look at our institutional restaurants that are still
Mm.
there at the highest possible level. But looking at today's food scene, do you think any of the 1990 concepts would carry weight in our new kind of era?
Yeah, it's interesting. I was talking to Paul Heathcote about current sort of state of things today, and he had two Michelin stars in
Yeah, yeah,
around 92, 3, 4, 5 kind of time, and he said, I think I mentioned in the book, that if you're looking out his window now in Lancashire, he probably been within half an hour. There's probably half a dozen restaurants that are serving food as good as he was serving when he had two Michelin stars. So the standard is absolutely risen enormously, and I think like a lot of things, if you watch if you watch a television program back that you remember as seeming absolutely amazing, it's the world has changed and suddenly it seems a little dated. Probably if we went back into some of those restaurants now, it would seem quite dated. An awful lot of the ideas, as you say, a lot of the some of the combinations, that were absolutely everywhere are still around. You're still going to find a potato fondant, somewhere, and that hasn't changed. But yeah, it's just the quality now is positively mind blowing. The number of places that developed, out of the back end of the 90s, it's just too many names to mention. But
yeah,
people
exactly.
like Simon Rogan and people, just the just incredible.
In all, I think like now, I almost see that you've got to be to be like high end successful independently. You have to have a very unique and a unique and wonderful idea. Like you say, Simon
Mm,
Rogan, he has the farm, he has
yeah.
his knowledge of the locality of up in Cartmel is
Mm,
flawless. And then
mm,
you've got like Brett Graham over at the at the Langham, where
mm.
it's just so insane. He's like nothing I've ever heard of as a chef before. What he does with the ingredients, with the attention to detail. Obviously, we
Mm.
know Heston through the many years. I mean, it's great to see Heston now coming back into media.
Yeah, isn't it? Yeah.
After what he's been through, I take a lot of inspiration from Heston because I got to the age of 44 and I was diagnosed with ADHD.
Really.
And for me now to relate and kind of understand what, listening to Heston talk about it, obviously he's gone through a lot worse a scenario than me, but for me now, I'm just starting to understand. Well, my home is a kitchen because ultimately I don't think I could find a home not doing anything else, because my brain is just so kind of set into the way. But the art of the celebrity, seeing them come from the 90s, that you can look at these people as inspiration and kind of they're almost mentors from afar, if that makes sense.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, that makes absolutely perfect sense because we do feel quite close to them, don't we? Because of the media connection, and it's
100%, yeah.
yeah, and it's incredible how what's I mean on Instagram how easy it is to follow people and see what they're doing, and
Well,
you do feel really connected. I think it's a really fantastic thing. I think.
yeah, and I think that's the positive side of, I would hate to have
Good.
thought, I mean, this is a question didn't think about until you literally brought up the word social media. I wonder
Mm.
how social media would have been in the 90s with, I can just imagine Marco getting a tweet on a busy night and just seeing phones being thrown around kitchens and all sorts of, can you imagine the impact of social media in then?
Yeah, and it makes you think, doesn't it, about what's changed our behaviour, and
Oh, yeah,
maybe being watched, maybe having cameras everywhere is something that's changed our behaviour.
possibly.
Yeah, I mean, because literally, I mean, yeah, it would have ruined the '90s, wouldn't it? Really,
I believe so, yeah.
yeah. I think
Absolutely.
what we had was that freedom just to yeah
Yeah, if you wanted to get
to
hold
be
of
bad.
me, you're either sending me a letter or you're making a phone call onto a landline, and that was it. It was
Exactly.
simple. It was very simple.
It
So
is very freeing and liberating that, and obviously we can only hanker back to it. And now we're all so connected. I've always got my phone on silent, and my kids
yes,
get really annoyed. They say,
yeah, my
"I'll
wife.
ring you.
Yeah,
Never answer your phone." I said, "No, I don't want my phone to ring in my pocket when I'm walking down the road."
exactly. My wife goes mad at me all the time that I've got my phone. She says you've got all of these devices that all make different noises, and you never pay attention to a single one of them. So
Exactly.
I am terrible for it.
But
So
that's why we remember the '90s fondly. And
I
it
think so.
was
Yeah,
such a period of social change, and such a period of culinary change as well. So that's it's not surprising that we're looking back on it now. I think, and
yeah.
it's that kind of 25-year period. I can't believe it was 25 years ago.
25 years. Oh, I wish you hadn't
Yeah,
said that.
I
Oh,
know.
now I feel old. So now that Blood, Sweat, and Asparagus Spears is out, what's next for you, Andrew?
That's a good question. I'm looking about. At the moment, I'm thinking about writing something about pubs.
Very good. Yeah.
um, but something more about the kind of the again the sort of the existential crisis, our kind of love hate relationship with them, from the temperance movements to moral outrages to putting the pub into sort of a social context about why they're really important, and why we treat them so badly.
Yeah, no, it's a great idea. I mean,
Just
I
some
kind of would you look at different eras of the restaurants?
Yeah, definitely. I definitely look at with pubs. I'll definitely look at the history because I think that's really interesting. I
Yeah,
really enjoyed looking at the history of. I would definitely. I was talking to someone about that the other day, and if I was 10 years older, I would have written a book about the 1980s. Faye Masher always says that the 1980s was the most exciting decade in restaurant culture in London, and I think she's right, but she's only really talking about 5 or 6 restaurants. Yeah,
yes,
it wasn't really. That's why it was the '90s was the explosion. But
Yeah, because it
the 80s kind of built those people like Alistair Little and the
the
River
box
Cafe.
tree, yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely,
they all started it, absolutely. But even then, it goes all the way back to people like George Pro Smith in the 1950s. I mean, the Good Food Guide started in 1951, pretty much because the people that started it, Raymond Postgate, he wanted to find the best places to eat, and he couldn't find where to go. So the places that were serving decent, proper food. So yes, well, that's why he created it, which is really actually, if you think about it, very similar to kind of like social media and modern things today. It was people creating a community of passionate foodies who would write and suggest all the places, and he put it in a book because that's what
yeah,
they did. It's
exactly.
actually quite a modern idea.
Exactly. Right, I've got a bit of a one now for you. This is a bit deep and a bit personal for you. So if you could go
Okay.
back and relive one dinner or one movement or one moment of the 90s food world, which would it be and why?
Wow. Do you know it's not reliving because I never went to Harvey's.
Yeah.
And I just wish I could just gone to Harvey's. So I would go back in, yeah, to make it to make it the 90s. Let's make it January the 3rd in 1990. I'd go to Harvey's.
Yeah.
I'd love to just experience. I want to see them whoosh someone when they used to throw people out who'd upset Marco. I've always it's interesting because one of the things that the Good Food Guide um, is different from the Michelin Guide. That's another thing that happened in the 90s. Really, is Michelin was pretty niche in the 80s. In the 80s, there were only like 30, 40 people with a star. Went up to about 100 or so, 150 maybe in the 90s, and then it increased dramatically. But we were always the Good Food Guide was always really about the food on the plate. So
Yeah.
you could go in there and you could have quite a bad experience. You
Yeah.
could say this place is a nightmare, but the food's amazing. So
Yeah.
go, so go. And I love that about it. I love mission is everything's got to be perfect. It's got to be the right glass. It's all got to be nice. And I think that's the Good Food Code was the right place to work in the 1990s because we didn't care about. We did write about the service and we say, Jesus, this place is noisy and it's crazy, but go because the food's amazing.
Food's amazing. I mean, like I'd say for my kind of era, I was cooking. I was at the Wonderful Vet Crew Hall back in like so 2000 2001. It
Yeah.
was two borderline three rosettes at the time,
Mm-hmm.
and my immediate kind of people that I was looking around was like Paul Heathcote was just kind of coming out, but Paul Kitchen was like a
Yeah.
massive figure for me. Up at Juniper, and it
Mm.
was. I think that was my first ever proper taste of a Michelin star meal where Tony, my sous chef, took me out. We went up one day for this meal. I remember turning up and I wasn't dressed appropriately, so he had to drive me home to get me dressed up so we could go up to Juniper. But then that just gave me the fire in the belly that took it on from being, a bit of a rebel Jamie Oliver kind of era to this really more formal. I mean, it's one of the
Yeah.
most memorable experiences of dining. I mean, meeting Paul, he was just a wonderful character. I mean,
Mm.
I've been told he was absolute, he was a wizard in the kitchen, but he was a
Yeah.
ball breaker in that kind of sense. And
Yeah.
that was from Mark Poynton. But
Yeah.
but that era that was encapsulated, it really did. I think it put us on definitely on the road to where we are now. I mean, but like you say, there's countless
Mm.
venues that we can look around and say, this place is incredible, that's incredible, that's incredible. We're in the best version of food culture I think we've ever been in because of the diversity. And, if you look at places like BB, who are, they've bought
Mm.
insanely good Indian cuisine and
Yeah.
made it absolutely
Yeah.
magical to eat and that kind of thing. So we are in
Mm.
a fantastic era, but I think we all have to agree, and I'm hoping that people can comment on the bot to say that the 90s was definitely the birth site for what led to where we are now.
Yeah. I really think so too. Yeah. I spoke to Katie O'Brien for the book, Paul Kitchen's partner, and she talked about how he was like she'd never read White Heat um, until after he died, and when she read it, she suddenly realised some of the language he got, where he got it from. So where that kind of aggression, the SAS of kitchens and the ball breaking that you talk about, that yeah, he was basically copying his idol,
And,
really.
and that's it. And that's it. So it's funny, really, because I think I can relate so much to the way that I was taught as a chef, the formalities and things like that. But
Mm.
we've been born into a new era, and
Yeah.
I can now see, it wouldn't wash now. I mean, I'm lucky enough that I'm literally sat in Hintlesham Hall, and the heritage behind this building itself. It's had an array of amazing chefs come through the door here,
Mm.
and things like that. So that heritage and that kind of it's all here. It's a legacy building, but the behaviors are so different now, and
Mm.
so kind of even the hours for chefs, the 60-hour weeks, the 50-hour weeks, and a lot of places talk about getting them chefs down to 40-45 hours now,
Mm.
because it's a different era completely. But I do hark back to the glory days of the 90s.
I think it's so important that it changes, isn't it? For the industry to thrive, it needs to attract people,
Yeah,
and it needs to look like a good career for young men and women, and hopefully it does now. Certainly better, but it's a bit like the old guys, isn't it? The new recruits are coming in, and the old guys saying, look at you should have been here back in the old days,
yeah,
and
yeah,
we're
yeah.
always going to look back fondly on it, and hopefully my book does that. To give because hopefully young chefs will read it to put our food culture in a little bit of context,
Absolutely.
because it's weird, you only know what you know, don't you? And it
Yeah,
seems like
yeah.
it's normal. But,
And that's the wonderful thing. Another thing that we spoke about before is that you're going to donate a copy of the
yeah,
book. You're going to sign it up for us,
I am
and
indeed.
we're gonna raffle it off. We're going to do like a pound a ticket, and we're going to sort it out so that we can send over a donation to the Burnt Chef, which Carl, my co-presenter, sadly he can't be with us on today. He's busy. Well, it's a busy chef life. That's why we call it the Chef Life podcast.
Yes, indeed.
And Carl's going to we're going to work away at getting a good donation over to
Yeah.
the Burnt
So
Chef.
there's the book. It's the one with Marco on the front cover.
Yeah, that's it's funny really, because everyone keeps not forgetting the title, but going, what was it called? But it's got Marco on the front. Uh,
Yeah.
and that's it. I'm going to put links on my website and the podcast website for people to buy the book. I suggest anyone who's listening get it. It's an absolute incredible read. It really is insightful, and it brings back so many of these thoughts about the 90s and the era. And like I say, it fills in the blanks for me. It's the other side of the story, not just the pain and torture that the chefs went through. I really do thank you for that, Andrew.
Pleasure. Thank you very much.
So no, thank you very much for your time today and joining us on the podcast, because like I say, it's people like you who, you're sharing those stories and things. I can't wait to see what you do about the book with the pub. I will definitely be buying it, because like I say, you gripped me with your writing style, and that's a great thing for me. So thanks ever so much for coming on the show today, Andrew.
Thanks, Lee. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Not a problem. Take care.
Cheers. Bye.
Andrew has kindly donated a copy of his book Blood, Sweat and Asparagus Spears in order for me to raffle it off at £1 a ticket. We're going to give all proceeds to the Burnt Chef project, and I will post the link onto this site and all other correspondence on my social media as well. It's £1 a ticket. All you got to do is put your donation across to the link, and I will perform a raffle draw on the 1st of December to win a copy of Andrew's fabulous book, Blood, Sweat and Asparagus Spears. And that's it for this week's episode. Before we go, another big thanks to Barrett Boards for sponsoring the show. They're still a small husband and wife team, and every board comes out of their very own workshop with pride and care, and sawdust included. If you want a board that will last, one that feels good to cook on as it does to serve from, go and check them out. Whether it's a bespoke block for your kitchen or a unique table just to put in the centre of your dining room, Barrett Boards bring the same love of craft to every single piece. Beautiful, functional and built to last, just how kitchen kit should really be.